Hello everyone. For the 3 people who end up watching this video, I welcome you. This is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast. So are you ready for my thoughts on 14 more Asian horror movies? I hope so, because that's what I'm doing. We will now continue our journey and our exploration of Asian horror. This video will cover films released from 1962 to 1968. And remember, titles for all of the movies I cover will be listed in the description box below. So I think we need to start with a movie with an interesting title, because it always gets the video going well, right? So our first movie today is called Upside Down Ghost, Breaking the Coffin, also known as Okinawan Horror and Chinese Horror. Those titles are completely different and make absolutely no sense, but that's what we're going with. The title actually sounds cooler than the film actually is. I don't remember any upside down ghosts or broken coffins or Chinese people. So I'm just going to throw that out there for you right at the start. Don't expect those things in this movie. So what is the plot of this movie? A man marries a beautiful, wealthy girl, but tragedy soon befalls them. That's the basic plot. Okay, I'll just leave it at that. Now, the main problem with this movie is that there's way too much dull filler to sit through. None of the character development or interaction is good enough to hold your interest. And it's a real slog, man. It's tough to sit through this. Now, the horror sequences use blue lighting quite nicely, but the ghosts basically just kind of stand there. So the scare tactics, they're not memorable at all. Overall, this is just an uninteresting, repetitive film that's kind of cheesy. That's really all I have to say about this. You can pass on this one. It's obscure, and it's obscure for a reason this time. Now, the next 2 films are huge, okay? It is no understatement to say that the next 2 films that we discuss are the most highly acclaimed and well-known Japanese horror films of the 1960s. In fact, I would say that, really, they are 2 of the most highly acclaimed Japanese films of all time, regardless of genre. So, if you're somewhat familiar with Japanese cinema, you probably know where I'm going with this. And, of course, where I'm going with this is we will be talking about Kwaidan and Onibaba from 1964. Now, I personally don't love these films quite as much as most people. In fact, one of them I don't really like too much, but we'll get to that. But regardless of my opinion on them, you need to watch both of these movies, okay? Because the vast majority of people that have seen these movies have loved them. I mean, these movies are beloved by everyone but me. So put these on your must-see list right now. I'm telling you that right now, before I even get started on my thoughts. Now, what are my thoughts on these? Let's start with the one that I like a little bit more than the other one, and that's Kwaidan from 1964. It's a Japanese horror movie. The director here is Masaki Kobayashi. Now, some of his other popular films are the Human Condition trilogy, those 3 films were released from 1959 to 1961 and are very good films. And also, Harakiri is also a big one of his. That was released in 1962 and is also an impressive film. Those are mostly dramas. Now, Quieten is an anthology of 4 short horror films. So, the plots for these are as follows. In The Black Hair, an impoverished swordsman divorces his wife and then remarries into a wealthy family. In The Woman of Snow, a woodcutter takes refuge in a fisherman's hut during a snowstorm and encounters a snow witch. In Hoichi the Earless, a priest attempts to protect a blind musician who is haunted by ghosts. And In a Cup of Tea is about a writer who keeps seeing ghostly faces in his cup of tea. So, right off the bat, the viewer should understand that there's not a whole lot of content, story, or character development to these short films, although some may disagree with me on this, which is fine. But that was my impression while watching these short films in Kwaidan. the impression I got here was that this was an attempt at kind of a work of art that's driven by visuals and sound more than anything else. It incorporates kind of a stage play style, which actually is quite interesting, and it works really well given the overall style of the film. I do think that the set designs and the lighting are excellent, and I really think those are the main reasons to watch this. They're really good. It's really atmospheric stuff. Now, all the stories are glacially paced, but the first two segments I think are strong enough in the story area compared to the latter two. I think the first two are a little bit stronger in story. Now, the third segment, I think, had some pacing problems. The Hoichi segment just had some pacing problems for me. But it is still decent. It's a pretty watchable segment. A lot of people love that one, though. So I'm just saying. The only segment that I personally found to be poor was the last one. The In a Cup of Tea segment. It has much weaker aesthetics. You know, the atmosphere and the set designs aren't as good. And I think that exposes the mediocre writing a little bit more in that one. So I actually don't really like that one too much. But, and also the scenes where they shows the ghostly faces in this cup of tea are pretty cheesy. But I did enjoy Kwaidan, just not as much as everyone else. Now, on a side note, I do believe that there were similar storylines in other films that were executed actually better than this one. So, for example, we are soon going to cover a Japanese horror film from 1968 called The Ghost Story of the Snow Witch, which has a similar story to the Woman of the Snow segment in Kwaidan. But I think The Ghost Story of the Snow Witch is actually the better overall film. Also, there was a Japanese television series called 100 Tales of Horror from 2002, which had an episode that was based on the same source material as Hoichi the Earless, and I actually prefer the television episode of that series a little bit better, because it had just a bit more of a well-rounded story and more developed characters. But that's just my opinion. But regardless of Kwaidan's flaws, I did enjoy it, and I learned to appreciate it more after repeat viewings. So make sure you watch this movie. I'm telling you right now. Now, the DVD availability for Kwaidan, you're in luck, because it's widely available. It's got some really nice DVD releases. Check it out. So the second film here is Onibaba, again from 1964. It's a Japanese horror drama kind of hybrid. Kaneto Shindo is the director. Now, I have enjoyed some of his other films, such as Kuroneko from 1968, which we'll get to soon, and a film called Human from 1962, which is really cool. So Onibaba is set in the mid-14th century, and it's basically about a woman and her daughter who kill samurai soldiers and sell their armor for food. That's kind of an interesting basis for a horror film. But, again, I'm in the extreme minority here, but the scenario is nice. Okay, let me get to some positives here. The scenario is nice. The scenery is really nice, because there's endless fields of reeds swaying in the wind, as well as a sparkling pond. The black and white cinematography actually added to the visuals. I really like the overall visuals and sound and everything. The production values in this are solid. But my big gripe with this movie is the storyline and the character development. I found it a bit dull. And I've watched this movie 3 times. I've given this movie 3 chances, and the story and the characters just don't click for me. You know, they're just not interesting enough to drive the whole film for me. But, you know, I found it to be kind of run-of-the-mill script writing. Just my opinion. But like I said, you have to see this movie as well. Regardless of my opinion, you have to see it, because virtually everyone loves it, and you probably will too. Now, DVD availability for Onibaba, it's widely available. A lot of good DVD versions available. There's good stuff out there. So make sure you watch those 2 movies, as I've said like 50 times. Now let's move on. The next movie we're going to review is a Filipino horror film from 1964 called The Blood Drinkers. So the plot for this one is that a vampire and his minions, being a hunchback and a dwarf, and I think a few other minions are tossed in there, they attempt to resurrect the vampire's love by harvesting the heart of her sister. So, again, the most memorable aspect of this movie, kind of like Kwaidan, is just the aesthetics. I mean, The Blood Drinkers has a very bizarre color scheme. It's almost like some of the scenes were actually shot in color, while other scenes were shot in black and white, and then there was post-production coloring like infused into it. So you have this like odd, like striking color scheme while you're watching this movie. I'm assuming that some of it was shot in black and white due to cost considerations. Maybe at the time, black and white was still a little bit cheaper than color. But it results in kind of a wildly colorful movie with tons of atmosphere. I mean, I'm a sucker for like deep red and blue hues, almost like what I call Dario Argento style lighting. And this movie kind of has that feel to it. The tone overall is the film kind of feels like a quality gothic film with a hint of cheesiness. There's for example, there's a rubber bat that makes an appearance at least once or twice. But I like it in this case. There's also a highlight of a surprisingly awesome fist fight for the ages, so look out for that. A few of the women are very attractive for the guys out there. I think this is a cool flick. I liked The Blood Drinkers. Now, some might criticize me for enjoying The Blood Drinkers more than Onibaba. I'm sure I'm in the minority on that opinion for sure. But what can you do? You know, what can you do? The DVD availability for The Blood Drinkers is widely available as well. So since Kwaidan, Onibaba, and The Blood Drinkers are all widely available, maybe you can have a little 1964 Asian horror movie marathon and see which one you prefer. And if you happen to be crazy like me and you prefer The Blood Drinkers to those three films, feel free to mention that in the comments section below. I won't be holding my breath on that one. Next movie on our list, we're back to Japan. It's a 1965 film called Ghost of the Hunchback. Let's take a look at my notes here. All right. So this film is about a hunchbacked caretaker who presides over a forlorn mansion inhabited by the ghosts of his previous masters. But an unbelieving trio of persons consisting of a doctor, an assistant, and his niece failed to heed the caretaker's warnings. Now, this film was shot entirely in black and white, and this one was seemingly inspired by Italian horror movies. I get almost like a Bava-esque type feel from this one. Excuse me. Again, there's some gothic atmosphere here, so fans of gothic horror might like this one. And there's other goodies to enjoy along the way. It's a pretty good movie. I enjoyed it. Excuse me. So this is a nice Japanese horror film from the 60s that you can watch to mix it up from the genre trends of the era. So there's no samurai in this because the film is basically set in modern times. Well, modern is in the 1960s. So it's a nice one to mix it up. If you've seen some Japanese horror movies, you're like from the 60s, and you're like, well, I want something other than a samurai film. Check out Ghost of the Hunchback if you could find it. Now, the director of this film is Hajime Sato. Not a widely popular guy, but it's probably because I've only seen like one other movie from this guy, and that was Goke Body Snatcher from Hell, which is by far the more popular film of the two. But his career didn't seem to really take off in terms of popularity in the West. Ghost of the Hunchback is a good one, though. I watched it without subtitles. You may be forced to do the same, but I recommend it anyways. It's worth it for the atmosphere. Now, DVD availability for this one, it's not widely available on DVD, unfortunately, but it is streaming on YouTube, but it's under a different title. The title on YouTube is called House of Terrors, Kaidan Semushi Otoko. So don't worry, I'll include it in the description box next to Ghost of the Hunchback in case you want to watch it on YouTube. Just search for that. So I recommend that one. The next film, we're back to the Philippines, 1966, Blood of the Vampires. Now this is a follow-up to The Blood Drinkers, alright? Is it as good? It isn't, unfortunately. Now the plot concerns a family who is cursed by vampirism. Now they keep their vampire grandmother chained in their basement, but the vampirism quickly spreads anyways, so it gets kind of out of control. It's not nearly as colorful or atmospheric as The Blood Drinkers, but this is still a pretty good movie. It's got enough atmosphere to it, story's decent. I would definitely recommend checking out The Blood Drinkers first, and then if you enjoy that one, then you could check out this follow-up entry. Some of these movies, this particular series of films, get some pretty negative reviews online. I don't know, I guess I can see why people don't like them, but I don't know, I kind of like these. So, if you read some negative reviews online, you're kind of put off by them, I still say watch The Blood Drinkers and see what you think. Now, Blood of the Vampires. The DVD availability of this, it is widely available, just like The Blood Drinkers. So, that's good. Now our next film here is called Violated Angels from 1967. This is a Japanese horror film. Now, this is our first exposure to Koji Wakamatsu, who is a very highly acclaimed Japanese director who still isn't that popular in the West. I mean, not a lot of his films have caught fire in the West in terms of hype, you know what I mean? But one reason for that, I think, is that some of his films were in the pinku exploitation variety. At the same time, though, to call Wakamatsu an exploitation director is doing him a disservice. I've seen a good handful of his films, and the two things that stand out to me for Wakamatsu is his excellent visuals and handling of camera shots, as well as his subversive political content. So what about Violated Angels? What's this movie about? Well, it's about a young man who overtakes a bunch of nurses at their dormitory and begins to shoot them dead one at a time. Now, it's a pretty disturbing premise. And the film it does get a little disturbing at times, which is good for a horror film, right? Now, this takes place mostly in one location, with the girls attempting to persuade the killer to set them free. So there's some tension there. And the director uses some moody experimental imagery near the beginning and end of the film. And the scoring and sound effects are very organic and moody. So there's like use of running water, wind, very light music, etc. It works really well. The runtime is 56 minutes, so it moves at a nice pace. And I think it's a pretty gripping film. And even though it is driven by its visual style as well, so if you're into that type of kind of, simplistic but efficient filmmaking, give it a go. Now, Violated Angels, unfortunately, is difficult to find. Again, put it on your to-see list. It might pop up on YouTube at some point in the future, so just keep looking for it. It'll pop up again. Next film on this edition is Love Foolery Case for a Severed Head from 1967. This is a Japanese horror movie with another excellent title. I mean, who thought of these titles? I mean, the only titles that get better than this are like Italian giallo films, really. Now, I viewed this one without subtitles, just telling you right off the bat. It's basically about a womanizing jerk who schemes with his mistress to kill his wife. And it seems to be for her money, I think. Now, this film has quite a bit of sensuality present. The lead actress is basically half naked much of the time. There are a few sexual assaults as well. But things do get interesting at about the 30-minute mark, with a fairly gruesome death. Kind of kicks things into high gear. The horror elements they're pretty good. There's the They use images of mutilated faces, which works, and I found the ending to be somewhat satisfying. So this is, it's a pretty good film. Not a high priority film by any means, but again, in an era where Japanese horror was dominated by samurai films, it's a nice little diversion again for Japanese horror. Now, unfortunately, just like Ghost of the Hunchback and Violated Angels, this one's difficult to find. So put it on your list and just look out for it. These films will pop up, you'll see. Just keep checking YouTube and wherever else. They'll pop up. So the next film on our list, alright, it's a South Korean horror film called The Public Cemetary of Wol-ha, also known as Public Cemetery Under the Moon, from 1967. And I believe, let me check my notes here, this is the first Korean film that we've showcased on this Asian Horror Year in Review, and yes, it is. Now, how does this South Korean horror film kind of hold up to their more modern and contemporary horror films? Well, number one, in some instances I might say Korean when I'm talking about horror films in this Asian Horror Year in Review playlist. Obviously, I'm referring to South Korea. In the world of film, you're not going to come across too many cinematic contributions from North Korea that have been released internationally. However, we are going to cover one North Korean horror film later in this review series. So I'll plant the seed of curiosity in you. But this is a South Korean one, The Public Cemetery of Wol-ha. So this film concerns a wicked stepmother and a housemaid who scheme to kill a woman for financial gain. Now the characters in the story are really average, and there's lots of dull filler. At times the dialogue I found to be flat out ridiculous and kind of unbelievable. There are, to its credit, there are a few atmospheric horror sequences, but those prove to be really the only positives in the entire film, and it's not really worth enduring the rest of the film just to get to those few decent horror scenes. So this early South Korean entry, it just doesn't stand. It can't stand toe-to-toe with many of their more recent, more impressive efforts. Now, it's probably the oldest South Korean horror film you're probably going to see, so you might want to check it out of curiosity, but I'm not recommending it. Now, before continuing, we have to stop for a second because we need to appreciate 1968. Now, 1968 was a pretty massive year for Asian horror in terms of production. This is especially true for Japanese horror. I mean, we're going to cover 14 horror movies from 1968 alone. Now, we'll have to wait until we get to 1999 before we encounter more Asian horror films from one particular year. So, 1968, it just seems, it's kind of odd. We had a huge gap from 1926 to 1954 in our last video, and now all of a sudden we're up to 14 movies in 1968 alone. So you can see how the production and the availability of these films just fluctuate so much. So the first film we're going to cover from 1968 is a film called Goke, Body Snatcher from Hell. It's from Japan. This is kind of a sci-fi horror. Now again, the director is Hajime Sato, the director of Ghost of the Hunchback. Unfortunately, though, I did not like this one as much as Ghost of the Hunchback. So the plot of Goke is that, after surviving a plane crash, a handful of passengers must fight an alien blob that changes its hosts into bloodthirsty vampires. Really good premise, but I don't like this one. It actually has a fairly positive internet reputation, this movie, so it has its fans. I found it kind of lame, though, unfortunately. There's way too much time spent on mediocre human infighting and heavy-handed morals, and the script isn't exactly strong either. The American actress here has some awful lines of dialogue, like real bad. The horror sequences, I'm putting quotes next to that, or around it, are pretty bland, and I found them to be a bit on the dumb side. It's just one of those flicks that it doesn't give you what you want. At least it didn't give me what I want. I mean, I want to see an alien blob and bloodthirsty vampires. I don't want to see lame human fisticuffs and infighting. I mean, if it's done well, I'll obviously like it, but here it just wasn't. I mean, I want to see Body Snatchers from Hell. It's in the title, for goodness sakes, you know? Yeah. But this is one of those movies that I kind of disliked it to the point where I really have no interest in even giving it a second chance or revisiting it. That could change, but whatever. But again, it does have a pretty good following, and it's widely available on DVD, so, go ahead if you want. The next film on our list from 1968 is a Japanese film called Genocide, from 1968. So in this film, insects, primarily bees, become wild and attack humans, causing chaos. Again, we're talking about dull filler in some of these uninspired old-school Asian horror films, and we're at that again here. This movie's just got boatloads of dull filler to it. You're just watching the movie, and you're just like, come on, man, something happened. So basically, there's like an insect attack near the beginning of the movie. Some dude survives, and he's in a hospital, and the authorities investigate. None of it is particularly interesting. The insects almost feel like a side plot for much of the time. You're stuck just watching this boring B-grade movie with no memorable sequences whatsoever. I found this to be lazy and uninspired. I don't recommend it. Don't bother watching it. The next film on this list is a film called Snake Woman's Curse, a Japanese horror movie from 1968. Now, in this film, the spirits of wronged persons haunt a landlord and his wicked son. So the dramatic elements here are pretty good. Okay, they're pretty good. They establish the plights of the victims, which is a good thing. But the horror scenes are just unsuccessful and highly repetitive. There's this bit where you have like a snake falling from like the above, and they use this a few times in this movie, and it didn't even work well the first time they used it. So after you see it a few times, it's just, you're not really impressed by it. The acting I found it to be a bit hit or miss. There's not much depth to cling to in terms of the script writing in place of all the other weak elements of the film. So Snake Woman's Curse is another one that I'm just not a fan of. It was directed by Nobuo Nakagawa, who we covered quite a bit in our last video, right? This isn't one of his best, however. So, let's move on. And as you may have guessed, we just hit a rather unimpressive patch of Asian horror films, didn't we? At least in my opinion. But now we get to discuss some of the more interesting Asian horror films from the late 1960s. And one of the interesting ones is a film called The Snake Girl and the Silver-Haired Witch from 1968. This is a Japanese horror film that is pretty cool. Now, the plot goes like this. Recently retrieved from an orphanage, a little girl gets situated in her family's mansion, but soon discovers that a malicious, disfigured girl is secretly lurking in the shadows. Now, it was directed by a man named Noriaki Yuasa, who also directed a bunch of Gamera flicks. The giant, turtle monster who transforms into a flying saucer. Some of you have no idea what I'm talking about, but Gamera is pretty cool. Now, the film itself here is based off of a story by Kazuo Umezu, and it's definitely worth seeking out. The mansion is the setting in this film, and it provides, as mansions frequently do, a nice creepy environment. The performances are good, and the ending is fairly intense. It moves at a nice pace, and I'm always a fan of horror films involving children, because we don't see them as often as we probably should. It gives you something different. Now, some of the special effects and makeup are cheap looking at times, but this is spooky fun stuff. I like this one. It's definitely a good start to the films based on Kazuo Umezu's works, which are almost always interesting and unorthodox. We're going to cover a few of these when we get further on in this Asian Horror Year in Review playlist. There's some really interesting films that are based off of Umezu's works. In fact, I would say any film that you find out is based on a Kazuo Umezu work, you could just watch it. You know what I mean? Because there's a high chance, a high probability it's going to be worth watching. Now, the DVD availability of Snake Girl and the Silver Hair Witch, unfortunately, it's not widely available in America. In fact, I don't even think it has a US DVD release, but there is a Region 2 DVD release without subtitles that's available. It's floating around on eBay. There might be one on Yes Asia. I would suggest, if you're interested in the film, to watch it without subtitles, because it's still enjoyable even without them. So now, the last movie we discussed today is going to be a big one. Okay, this is up there with Onibaba and Kwaidan. And this film is called Kuroneko, also known as Black Cat, from 1968. This is a Japanese horror film. Highly, highly acclaimed film. So, the plot of this movie goes like this. After being murdered by Ronin, a woman and her daughter seek vengeance from the grave. So, this film has fantastic use of lighting. It's shot in black and white, so some of the set designs almost look like they glow in the dark. Like there's a high contrast between the black and the white, you know what I mean? Which I found to be really cool. I kind of wish more films were shot like this. We have that almost like, I don't want to call it neon glow, but it kind of has a striking aesthetic there. There's a lot of references to black cats throughout. So if you're into horror movies that have black cats attached to as like a theme, that's showcased here. Some of the ghosts have like animalistic mannerisms at times, which is pretty nice. The dramatic elements come into play when a third character shows up who is assigned to investigate the ghostly events. And this character, I think, had a relationship with the murder victims when they were alive. And that kind of creates a conflict of interest for this character. This is a very impressive film from director Kanito Shindo that has received, as I said, much praise over the years. And I think rightfully so. But in terms of the three most highly acclaimed films we've talked about in this video, I actually prefer Kuroneko to the other ones. So, we got another chunk full of Asian horror films covered today. We're going in a pretty good clip here, I think. And the highlights, as I mentioned a million times before, Kwaidan, Onibaba, Kuroneko, all of them are easy to find. Kuroneko has a wide DVD distribution as well. So there's no excuse not to watch these if you're interested in Japanese horror. You have to watch those three movies. But there are also some, underrated, lesser-known gems out there. I've pointed out The Blood Drinkers. I say check that one out. And The Snake Girl and the Silver-Haired Witch. If you could find that one, check that one out as well. So that's it for our video today. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope it was somewhat helpful for you. And as always, we'll see you next time.